Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm with MySecurity Media, and this is our Tech and Sec Weekly, our Tuesday afternoon episode. And given it's the end of March, we're going to do a Q1 2021 market update. So we're going to be talking with Chris Flaherty, Dr. Chris Flaherty. He's with MySpace Warfare Analysis Lab, and he's been writing for our Space and Defence .io channel and a number of articles that he's written. And likewise, we're going to look at the space sector on how it's fared for Q1 of 2021. There's so much been going on, so we're going to be struggling to keep this on the hour, but we will do our best. And obviously, in terms of those trends, we look at the sort of the second half as we move through 2021 on what we're faced with. Without further ado, there's a lot of news coming out on this sector. This is our Space and Defence channel, and I'm going to be bringing on Dr. Chris Flaherty of the MySpace Warfare Analysis Lab. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Chris versus Chris. Great to see you. Now, we have had you on, and the last time we spoke was we're talking about war lasers. Now,
Yep.
For those in the audience who don't know Dr. Chris Flaherty, Chris writes a number of articles, very forward-looking, sort of almost extreme in their own right, but it does start to give you a sense of where space is heading. And what we're going to do, Chris, we've looked at the first 3 months of 2021 in the space sector, and I've got your notes in front of me, and let's just rattle them through. I take it you've got your notes as well?
That's correct. Just on the war lasers, it's actually quite interesting. Perseverance rover actually has a laser.
Nice.
And it's actually fired it for the first time on Mars.
Yeah, well, it was interesting, you know, after that discussion, I started to see lots of news and other announcements about lasers as well. So again, from the audience, just turn yourself on to laser technology when you read it and see it, and you'll start to see there's a lot happening in lasers. We covered a little bit on it on the fiber optics as well, on optic networks. Obviously, they use lasers as well. So it's very much leading technology. Let's start off. I suppose the main one was obviously we've landed on Mars.
That's correct, yeah.
So yeah, talk us through, and the NASA helicopter is about to take off.
The helicopter is about to be deployed on Mars. Now, it's a small helicopter. It's about the size of a standard drone. It's currently hooked on the underbelly of the Perseverance rover, and the first NASA tweeted the first photograph showing the process of basically releasing the helicopter and setting it up on the ground. So that's a 6-day process. It's not a long. Everything has to be tested and pre-tested. In actual fact, there's a copy, an exact duplicate of Perseverance, what's in a place called the Mars Yard, where everything they plan to do with the rover on Mars is first done by its duplicate here on Earth.
Wow.
So it's a long process, and as they have said, once they start, they cannot stop.
And I suppose they execute that program, and I suppose the other one is the 20-minute delay on whatever command they give. They don't know if it's working for 20 minutes.
That's correct, and even when we were actually watching the actual landing of Perseverance on the day it happened,
yeah,
we were actually watching it 7 minutes after it had actually happened. So, hence the expression, the 7 minutes of hell. So,
I feel like that when we go live on here. I've got to wait 20 seconds just to know I got the feed going through. 20 seconds is a long time.
The only other little interesting piece is they actually took a piece of the original Wright brothers airplane, the Kitty Hawk.
Yeah, right.
Little piece of the canvas just underneath the solar panel for the integrity.
Incredible.
Because this will be the first time humans would have flown on another planet.
Yeah, and almost like that remote flight as well. Maybe because it's actually going to fly on April the 8th. It's scheduled for, right?
That's the current anticipated date. That's correct, yes.
Okay, so slightly outside the quarter. What else have you got here? SpaceX, the SN11 launch was yesterday, was it?
Well, it was actually supposed to happen earlier in Australian time. The launch was scrubbed yet again.
Damn it.
There's a lot riding on this launch. One is what has surfaced is issues with the relationship with the FAA. A lot of that you can pretty well take it as, you know, there's a lot of argy-bargy going on out in the internet world. What they're trying to do is embed an FAA official with SpaceX, because this is the process, they're moving at speed in terms of testing and launching these vehicles. They have had some crashes in the past. That's expected. That's part of the SpaceX process. They've also had weather problems. As you know, Texas had severe weather problems for the first, a month ago. They had severely bad weather last week in terms of launching the craft. There was fog as well. So they're looking tomorrow, the 30th US date.
Yeah.
And they should attempt the launch again. What's significant about SN11 is it's the last of the current campaign, where they're testing a particular maneuver, the ability of the craft to be launched, reach 10 kilometers, reverse, flip, go into its famous belly flight, flip again, and then land. And what they're testing at the moment is that actual process, and they've only got 3 engines on it, which are the gimbaled central engines, which allow the craft to be maneuvered.
Yep.
So that's what they're testing, as well as the issue about the actual landing legs. Once they successfully complete that maneuver, they then go to a new series called the SN15 to 20. These are expected to be much more upgraded craft. There's a long way to go, and as Elon Musk has often said, building the rocket's easy. It's the system to build the rocket, which is actually hard. And that I think a lot of people don't quite understand when they look at Space Base, well, Space Base as it's called, I think it's called Space Base. They don't realise it looks like a light industrial area, and it looks like there's a lot of fabricating going on of craft. But they're not realising that what they're doing is they're actually figuring out what's the entire industrial process to build a spacecraft, get it onto a pad, test it, and then be able to launch it. And it's going to be, and basically return it, recondition it, and send it back up again.
Yeah, and that's the commercial process that Elon Musk follows, right? A bit like the Tesla program.
And there's a lot to go into turning what we see now into an actual spacecraft that could carry potentially up to 100 people.
Well, look, best of luck to them, because, they've got it landing. They've just got to not blow up afterwards. So that's one to watch, and hopefully within the next 24 hours. So that's a good one.
I would also suggest don't be disappointed if it gets scrubbed again, because as I said, there's a lot riding on this mission.
Yeah.
And I think the way I think they will get there. I mean, that's inevitable, because there's a lot to go riding on this. And we're talking about a craft that's in the order of 120 tons plus.
Mm.
Even a soft landing, I think it was calculated as hitting the ground at something like 20 miles per hour.
All right.
We're dealing with an awful lot of stresses and strains on this craft. But, this is something which potentially could actually change dramatically how humans enter into and operate in space if the craft of certain proportions can be built. And
the images coming out with those it does take us back to the video market as well, and the high resolution video of this and of these tests is amazing. It looks cinematographic in a way. It really is an amazing feat, just from the angles and the views that they're able to capture.
Well, the interesting thing is that out there's a huge body of enthusiasts who are actually, they're parked out on the greens, so to speak, outside SpaceX's front fence, and they've been documenting this. So, I mean, I think one of the difficulties that SpaceX is probably facing at the moment is that the enthusiasm and the hype is that potentially you have a crowd of people out there literally loving the thing to death. And that's, in one respect, that's good, because that gets people enthusiastic and interested in this technology. But it can also be detrimental, especially when people don't understand, well, it just blew up. Well, in actual fact, it was probably expected to blow up anyway. What they want to be in the situation is when it finally lands, it doesn't blow up. They know exactly what to build next, and then they can push on ahead. They ultimately anticipate to move to a weekend launching testing, but every coming Saturday, Sunday.
Nice.
So we are looking at a lot of activity ultimately. To what will be the next big thing, of course, is the test of their booster, the Super Heavy Lift booster, which is going to be one of the largest craft ever built. Now one of those will roll out fairly shortly after this test, and that will be tested on the ground in terms of pressure testing the craft. But they do there is an expectation that there should be a full test launch by about June, July of both the booster with the Starship on top of it. And we're talking about one of the largest spaceships ever built.
Okay, it's looking good for 2021. That's why we're covering space a lot more now.
Yep.
just on how exciting it is. Now, just conscious of time, Chris, let's run through the Rolls-Royce innovative contract with the UK Space Agency.
Yeah, this is actually probably one of the more interesting ones because Rolls-Royce is a pretty impressive company when it comes to nuclear technology. And the best expert opinion or the best view is that ultimately, if we want to go to Mars, we need to shorten the distance dramatically. Nuclear propulsion rocket engines will do that. What interestingly enough, even Musk himself actually in 2019 made a comment that he actually ultimately saw Starship being fitted out with nuclear propulsion with these sorts of engines. We could in fact actually see an entire generation of tugs effectively who basically push craft into orbit and ultimately onto their flight path into another planet, disengage and then allow the craft ultimately to land or go through its process for landing. So essentially that technology is going to be a fairly significant player. And again, it shows that we are beginning to go from the rubber hitting the road in terms of we're not just testing technology or say it's going to happen in 10 years' time. We're now looking at actual technology which will start hitting the marketplace. And I think this is one to watch.
Definitely. And that, just briefly on the stats on that, that's potentially making that trip to Mars 20 to 25% shorter.
That's correct.
With that. The next one is the Axiom space, revealed first ever private astronaut crew for the ISS.
Yep, this is Axiom Space is actually fairly well positioned within the market in terms of its financial backing and also in terms of its expertise to start building effectively a brand new space station on the back of the existing ISS. So what we're going to start seeing in the next couple of years are progressive missions where Axiom are sending missions to the space station to get crews familiarized with the space station, also start the planning process. So what we will then see is ultimately by 2024, the first module being constructed, launched to the space, attached to the space station with its own robotic arm, and then successive modules after that. It's expected at a certain point that the Axiom space station will release itself from the ISS, and will start a whole new career as another space station. We're not sure as to what the ultimate fate of the ISS at the moment is. It does actually have a use-by date of another 5 years.
Yeah.
However, it's been in space already, I think we're looking at a 20, 30-year program. So potentially we don't know how much longer the ISS will be there, but we're now looking at the first generation of replacement space stations. And later, and very shortly, we'll also talk about the Chinese will begin their major missions surge to start launching their space station.
Well, speaking of that, is the next one. You got the Russian, Roscosmos, the Russian Federation State Corporation for Space Activities, has issued a statement. It and China were going to sign an agreement for an international lunar research station.
Yep. I think a lot of people didn't really take this one terribly seriously, which is unfortunate because this is not something that's just come out of nowhere. It sits the back of the Chinese development. The Chinese have been looking for have had a vision statement out there, looking for international partners as well as their vision to ultimately place a lunar research base on the moon. The Russians have been really one of the natural partners for the Chinese, in that the Russians, like the United States, they both have extensive experience in building pressure modules. And really, when we're starting to look at space stations and lunar bases, we're actually almost looking pretty well at the same technology. And literally, as one is floating in space, one is being placed in position on the surface of the moon. And I think that the other interesting thing about this is, as we'll cover off when we look at the Chinese approach, they've always stated we're looking at proven technologies and we're taking the pragmatic approach. And I think this has been one of the biggest problems probably with space up to now, is it's always done in prospective sense. In 10 years' time, we will do this, or we will develop technologies to do this.
Yeah.
Yet we actually had this technology with us for over 20 or 30 years now. And
this comes. Sorry to interrupt. This comes on the back of China, the intensive launch campaign.
That's correct.
With 11 launches to complete the construction of their large modular space station by around 2023.
And yes, and I was looking at the latest Chinese reporting, and they are indicating that probably about spring China time, which is about May, they should begin actually the first module launch. So we should actually start seeing construction take place this year. Now, this will be really interesting because I think people will get for the first time to see a practical example of what's actually needed to get a space station into space. The Chinese have already largely built the station on the ground, ready to be assembled. So effectively what you're doing is you're building the craft on the ground. Remember, space stations are actually spacecraft.
Yep.
They've been built on the ground, they're laid out, then they're shipped to the rockets, then they're put into space. Crews are already training in China on a mock-up of the station currently to prepare themselves ready for the process of doing this. But this, again, is going to be a classic example of how these things are actually built, because once these surge starts, once they start, they have to keep going. So again, we're looking at a fair amount of activity this year as they start putting one up after another, getting crews up there to start building this thing and putting it together. So this is actually going to be a really exciting time, I think, from people to getting to see practical examples of how humans go about doing this in space.
And what impact do you think that will have on the current ISS? Do you think China will exclude or then start to bring their own partners into their space station, and then we end up with a sort of a US led space station and a China led space station, as we do see with this technology divide between the two? I
tend to be a little more hopeful. I have a feeling that given the issues, because a lot of there is actually a bit of an overlap between China's international partners and the actual current international partners on the International Space Station. And yeah, there has been an historic issue where the US had largely banned actually from engaging with China in terms of space technology. I have a feeling that we may in fact be going towards a posture where these things start to merge in terms of similarity of programs, similarity of people involved, and similarity of the technology. I think that the realities is given that space is starting to become a very crowded space, especially in low orbit, I can't see how you can't do this with some sort of coordination. To give you an example as well, even though the moon is a largish place, I can't see how you won't end up with a situation where a large number of people are starting to set up lunar base operations without there being coordination. And the other basic issue is, think about space, and the analogy of space has been Antarctica or the Arctic. We all have bases out there. There is a certain amount of coordination and mutual support. It's inevitable given what a harsh environment we're actually talking about. So I think one of the pragmatic issues, or the practical issues, might well be that we actually do start to see a lot more coordination in the future. That's inevitable. I mean, even if there's an actual mishap in space, someone's got to come to someone's help.
I take it the sort of almost the law of the sea counts, and that's hopefully they sort of do abide by that. As you say, it's an exploration effort as well.
It's everyone involving, because international space law is starting to resemble international maritime law, largely because we are starting to see so much human activity in space. Up to now, it was really superpower rivalry. We're now seeing it's called complexity inversion. The complex activities were carried out by governments, and only a handful of governments at a certain point in time. There's an inversion where governments become, and we'll actually cover this off at the very last topic, where governments are simply paying for a service. But private enterprise actually has now got the bulk of the space assets. Axiom is an example of that. At a certain point, NASA is actually paying for a service on a commercially run space station. So there's been a complexity inversion to private enterprise. And that's an inevitable progression in space. That's exactly what we're seeing with Elon Musk and SpaceX, complexity inversion. At one point, NASA was the sole stakeholder and holder of the big pieces of collective machinery, if you like, for going into space and being in space. That's now been flipped over, and you've now got private enterprise companies holding onto that.
And NASA itself, we just released an article on that why NASA is being commercialised for that very reason. Now, let's finish off with some news from closer to home. And I did mention the South Australian announcement from Southern Launch, and you've got this in your notes as well. This it's quite a big news. We're going to start launching into space from Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's a couple of companies we need to keep in mind. Southern Launch is one because they're actually they're actually mostly looking at the infrastructure side in terms of building a series of potentially there's three places for bases in Australia. There's one in South Australia, which is better for the polar orbit, the central South Australia, Northern Territory, and there's probably up towards the far north of Australia, which is better for going towards equatorial launches. But the two major company players, there's a number of company players in this area, but we've got Southern Launch, but we've also got Gilmore. I'm sorry, I just pronounced
Gilmore
that.
Space, yeah.
Gilmore Space, who are actually in the process of actually testing and building a rocket themselves, a rocket body. So this again, actually, I think the interesting thing is that Australia, what I like about this story is it shows that you can be either in the end of one end of space exploration where you're talking about testing and developing new technologies, or you're at the end of the market, we're talking about building space infrastructure. And this is very much about us building space infrastructure. There is a defense component to this, and this is where we're starting to look at the very small rockets which are able to get into low Earth orbit, a small satellite device into low Earth orbit. And essentially that I think is interesting, and I think it also it starts to push the Australian space industry in the right direction in terms of actually having actual assets. For instance, the other day there was a fairly significant announcement where the UNSW in Canberra space had launched a CubeSat again, but they were using a Rocket Lab mission, which of course we have Rocket Lab in New Zealand. So what we need to start seeing in Australia is probably a move towards both a fixed base as well as mobile bases. Southern Launch, interestingly enough, have actually been looking at mobile launches because they're actually firing a much smaller type of rocket to go into low Earth orbit or just onto near Earth orbit. So that I think is actually pretty interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how they fare and how much government support they ultimately get.
Well, they do. It's also on Indigenous involvement as well.
Yep.
So, there's a lot of sort of STEM benefits out of that as well. So we look forward to, we'll be speaking to Lloyd Dant, the CEO of Southern Launch, on April the 6th.
Yep.
And we have had Gilmore. So for anyone listening, we have a space and defence playlist on our YouTube. So all of our previous interviews, we've had Gilmore Space on before as well. And the like. And then let's finish off with the last one. The CSIRO has now got a new agreement with Intuitive Machines for moon landings.
Yep, and I think this reminds me, have we all seen The Dish?
Of course. I watch it every time it's on TV on Sunday night.
And it takes us back to the absolute heyday of the golden era of the space age with the Apollo landings. And again involves that wonderful piece of historic installation, the Parkes Radio Telescope. This is actually an interesting one because the story is more complicated than what we have in the actual release. What's happening is again this process of NASA commercialization and passing off the hardware and the stuff to actually do the launches to private enterprise in the US. And Intuitive Machines are about to start a program of putting launches on the moon, which are going to get progressively bigger and more complex. The role of the Parkes Telescope and the CSIRO is part of the entire tracking network, which has to be set up. The interesting point about the commercial agreements that, in terms of the US bids, is something like 50% of the actual respondents' bid has to be done domestically in the US. In the case of Intuitive Machines, I think they've actually got probably most of their supply chain is actually in the US, but they also have a fairly substantial international component. And again, it goes back to, we're sort of looking almost at the sort of in the 21st, we're looking at the sort of process of actually getting a lander like the Apollo mission back onto the moon. And so this is actually a fairly large setup, but it's again an example of where the private company has to get all its ducks in a row in order to progress with the NASA contract. They will ultimately be taking, I think the first mission will take about half of it will be a NASA payload, the other half will be commercial. And I think their third mission, which is for 2023, actually at this point in time will be fully commercial. So now by 2023, we should be starting to see a fair amount of significant activity on the moon. And I suspect as well as that even though countries are saying that we will have something built by 2025 or by 2030, I suspect that once the surge begins in terms of space, the space industry, and the funding starts to be seen and the benefits start to be seen, we're probably going to see a lot of those dates brought forward substantially.
Well, certainly when they start taking off and it's there's no more crashes and the testing's over,
well,
and they have technology that works, right?
And as a country like China starts to you start seeing major launches, and they are building something, and you can actually get a telescope and actually watch it from Earth. I think people are going to start seeing space turns from being something that's a bit jokey and a bit Star Trek-y and a bit science fiction-y to being something which is actually real, and we are actually dependent on space. For example, I think I watched an excellent presentation by the head of Gilmore, where actually talked about the fact is that we're ultimately going to become extremely dependent in the Australian interior upon our space-based infrastructure for broadbanding network. And I think the earlier presentation you actually had was the two gentlemen talking about surveillance technology and other sort of tech like that. In the Australian wide area, in the Australian outback, in terms of our area schools, which are actually largely on the individual farmsteads and things like that, that's the sort of technology we're going to be reliant on.
Yep. Well, it will be. It is a game-changing area. Now, I'm conscious of time, and we've gone over the full hour, so we will try to keep the audience wanting more. And as I mentioned, we'll be back with Southern Launch on April 6th. We'll continue to monitor it. Chris Flaherty, if you go to our spaceanddefence.io channel, you can see all of Chris's articles on there. And otherwise, you can join his LinkedIn group, the MySpace Warfare Analysis Lab. And again, he's obviously monitoring this as an analyst. And also a contributor author as well. So look, Dr. Chris Flaherty, thank you so much for your time. A pleasure catching up again. Keep those articles coming. And what was the title of your last one? Just released today? Or?
I think I dropped a new one onto you today.
I did. I saw that. It's off. It'll probably be on the website already. So please check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes for this latest article as well. But thanks, Chris. Very detailed, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's a great opportunity to have a talk. Thanks so much.
Have a good day. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye. Okay, very good. And almost too much going on. It's a little bit scary, but very, very exciting. Now, just to finish off, our report of the day, as I always do, and this is from CEDA, and that is the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. And this is a good match, optimising Australia's permanent skilled migration. Somewhat troubling. Research highlights that nearly a quarter, about 23% of permanent skilled migrants in Australia are working in a job beneath their skill level. And then more than 32% of state-sponsored migrants were working at lower skills, and the employer-sponsored migrants experienced the best outcomes. Only 13% were working at a lower skills level than their nominated field. But it has cost the country over that 5-year period an estimated $1.25 billion of wages foregone for that permanent skilled migrants who have experienced a skills mismatch. So this one's on the MySecurity Marketplace, along with a range of other industry reports. So please check this out as well. The Cyber Risk Leaders magazine. You can grab a copy of that on the marketplace, as well as check out some of the merchandise. And it's not just the Cyber War series, it's also a range of cyber security and security-related merchandise. As we mentioned a couple of times now, Lloyd Damp will join us on April the 6th, talking about the Southern Launch approval for their space launches out of the Kuniba test range. And then we're going to be joined by Amir Beery, who's the founder and CEO of Camiro Tech, based in Israel, as the first one of our Israeli tech series. So looking forward to that one. That one is a portable ISR through-wall imaging system. Always very interesting. Now, I don't know what has happened to our chat. Thank you to Squadron Leader Sebastian. He's one of our most regular followers. So thank you so much for your comment there. But if you want to get a copy of the secure board, check out, please. There's 3 to still to give away. I can't believe no one's grabbed them just yet. And then also, if you want a D-Link camera and you're here in Australia, let us know how much these are retailing for, and I will send you out our free edition, our free copy of your D-Link home surveillance camera. So thank you so much. Appreciate your time listening to us today. We've gone over time, and that's it from us. Have a happy Easter, and we'll be back on April the 6th. Thank you.